Hello, everybody. Welcome to the another episode of Global AI, the podcast. With me today is Harpreet. But before we get into the Harpreet, I would like to introduce myself. So I'm Arafat, joining you from Sydney, Australia. I'm also Microsoft MVP for AI, and we will be discussing AI in neonatal care today. Um, we have requested Harpreet to join us from US. So we would like to introduce him. And before I go myself to introduce him, Harpreet, would you like to introduce yourself? Because that would be much more appropriate than me.
Thank you, Arafat. So, this is Harpreet. I'm joining you from Madison, Wisconsin. So, as a background, I have a PhD in biomedical engineering. I'm an engineer. I've did my bachelor's in electronics, then did my master's in biomedical engineering, and I've worked in healthcare sector for last 20 years across like Philips. My last role was at McKinsey. So that's me.
So you were an engineer, and how, like, what was the motivation behind this specific startup? And before we get into this startup, actually, we would love to know what is it about, and then your motivation behind it. Why did you start it? A little background to that. That would be really great. Yes.
So yeah, I had child health imprints, and the mission of my company is to give preterm babies a voice. So these babies are born before term, before 37 weeks, and since they are so fragile and very tiny, we, as in the clinical environment, we measure all their different organs, and we connect sensors to measure their brain, measure their heart. So which generates like gigabyte of information per baby every day. My company uses artificial intelligence, data mining to look at this data and then learn from this data for based on existing disease models, and then try to help the doctor as a clinical decision support tool. So that's what we do. As a motivation, I mean, I was blessed with twins 11 years back. So me and my wife, so I used to work at Philips at that time, and both the babies were 1000 gram, 27 weeker. And we unfortunately lost one child after a week due to neck, and the other one stayed in the NICU for close to 51 days. So my wife, who's the co-founder of other company, so she is also masters in computer science, and this is our third startup. So we had done initial company which was bought by a subsidiary of Philips in brain monitoring, which is my background. And then the second startup, we worked for one of the largest pharma companies in terms of image analytics. We felt like this is a good opportunity for us as parents to, even though we had a loss, but after that loss we met so many babies parent who were born preterm. And even in my work life in McKinsey, parents who went through similar journey, but these things doesn't come in the we don't get to see them. So overall, like 15 million babies are born preterm every year, and we lose 4 million of these babies in first 27 days. So I think it was a blessing in disguise. We started working in this area, and now we are running in 27 NICUs. We have touched close to 75,000 babies, and captured close to 12 million data points, and that's what we are doing.
This is impressive. Like the way you have described from collecting the gigabit of information, and sadly about your story. But it is again one of the motivations as well. Like I'm really inspired by how your you came up with an idea despite your loss, and I, being a dad myself as well, I can really feel that pain of losing someone you deeply love. So and but having said that, the motivation which you have brought up in your work is really commendable. You mentioned that 4 million babies, I think this is correct, right? 4 million
Right.
babies are lost within 27 days. And if you are contributing towards that, I think it's not just a part of your business, rather this is something, not something, this is very much bigger than just doing your usual work like I do in my day life.
Yeah.
So this is really cool. Now, coming to the data points part of the question before getting into anything else, how do you work with that? Like you are saying that there are so many sensors collecting data points, gigabit of information. uh, what is the scale for that? Like how do you guys scale, and what was the initial data points numbers, and how did you grow till to the gigabit to the to this much of bigger information? Was it initially the same, or you scaled it that way?
So yeah, I mean, yeah, I will say as an engineer, you learn and kind of understand the problem. So when I had the child and I was at Philips at that time, I was looking at the machines and how the baby is monitored. Then we made friends and neonatologists, and they explained the domain challenges. So simply like losing a baby can be as simple as giving feed or extra feed to the child when they're not ready for it. So which can cause infection in the intestine, and you start like you can't control it. So
Hmm.
it can be as simple as thermoregulation, where you have a child born at labor and you need to maintain the temperature because these babies are born in sometimes 6 months. They don't have brain developed to control the body temperature. If you don't give that cooling or thermal regulation to the child, they will lose out. And so I will say, Rafat, you learn. So when we started, we created a device called Neo, which can aggregate the data from different sensors coming from EEG, like brain sensors coming from heart. But then you realize like more and more sensors are needed to understand the black box, because you can't just look at the brain, you can't just look at the heart, you can't just look at the ventilator, the lungs. And what has happened is most of these companies have created proprietary protocols to. It's very hard because the challenge is not technical. The challenge is more data integration, where you have to bring data from different devices at different clock speed, and then you have a video feed where the camera is watching the baby, and you want to link everything at the millisecond resolution, because our heart rate variability, which is the early onset signal for most of these diseases, work at a second resolution. So it's a challenge of data integration, then challenge of data synchronization, and then you scale slowly. I mean, you first look at patient monitor, which is important for understanding heart, then you look at ventilator to lung, then you look at brain, and then you keep adding different modalities, and then you start learning the domain, because as a neonatologist, if you don't the system don't think like neonatologists, you can't make the same decision if you don't understand the nutrition, you don't understand the medication. For a 400-gram baby, if you give more nutrition or if you give wrong medication, 5 ml can make the huge difference. So it's step by step.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. But you mentioned about the bigger players in the market and their proprietary um, technology, or the way of doing it. So it's good that we have seen that the problems are in biology have been solved so frequently and so productively now. But it looks like and it sounds like that there is still a problem of openness when it comes to all the accessibility of that tech. So do you think that we are still too far to implement this across the board, like in the countries which are developing countries? um, uh, is it too expensive for them? Is it too difficult for them to have those their hands on that tech, or it's just that uh, we don't have that talent yet?
No, I will say, as we all understand, AI, since it's a global AI podcast, so AI is all about data. So you
Hmm.
have standard models, and models are there for decades. So you need good data to make good decisions. So models can learn. If you give garbage in, they produce garbage out. The reason of creating a device was we understood if you don't control the data source, you can't control the data models. So we captured the data at the source level, cleaned the data, and we started getting data from more and more sources. And it's all about getting that clean data. The Western world or the developed world is far ahead in terms of digitization, so they have more aggregated data. Developing countries struggle from the data because the decisions are mostly on the cost sensitivity, not on the data integration, like how much data should be seamless and integrated. So I will say like the problem is in the developing world because the data is more scattered, the deaths are more prominent. But the solution is in the developed world where the data is integrated, so you can learn, you can build model, test model, and then deploy in the developing world to benefit these environments. I don't think we are far away. It's about like if you we all are like good engineers. If you have What I learned in my consulting experience is that if you understand the domain, the challenge is in the data and understanding domain. So if you don't put yourself as an engineer into the game and you put more yourself as a clinical person, you start realizing it's a non-linear problem. It's not a linear problem where y is equal to, function of x. Things can go very radically different, and those are the aspects you need to learn from the doctors, and that's what the system is, I will say, still improving.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. This is a very good distinction, by the way, when you have talked about engineer versus a simple mere clinical person. Although they are doing their jobs, but in order to create something, you need to have that engineering mindset to make it success. So one more question around this is, so does it mean that if we develop something in the developed country using all that digitized um, data, uh, will it be near to solving that problem in the developing? I know that there will be a different data set over there will be a different scenarios, but will it match somehow that whatever the solution we create, let's say in US, it would work in India or in Pakistan or in Bangladesh?
Yeah, so that's a great problem, and since we have operation in both US and India, this question is being asked. So simple thing is like you will build a model in US and then you will go to India. The nurse to patient ratio in an ICU in US will be, 2:1, so there will be two babies for one nurse. You go to India and there can be four nurses managing 30 babies, so you have a nursing ratio 1:8. Now, what nurse can see on the screen, what she can react on the screen is very different than the care provider concerns. The doctor
Yeah.
will do three times round, then the doctor has their personal OPD time where they won't be able to see. In the US environment, the provider will be only dedicated to the hospital and might be spending
True.
a lot of time on the clinical work, research work. So I won't say, they can superimpose. What I was trying to say is, I mean, you have to understand the problem, the data. The data is the crux. Data will speak the truth. What data you will get in developing country will speak the truth of the provider behavior, the disease behavior, the demographics behavior. So if you capture the data well and you annotate the data well, that these are the things which are getting, then the systems will learn the same thing. And if the system, you focus on the data and the systems, the problem can be superimposed.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. So, and what is the, if I ask you that, what is, this is your biggest challenge right now, what is that?
I think, I learned as an entrepreneur raising capital. So initially, that was the hardest problem because you get challenged by your investors that you need to raise more money. And problem is hard. I mean, it hasn't been solved for decades, many decades. So it's a hard problem. So it needs money. So you need to raise money. I will say that was one problem. Regulatory challenges, building like solution. There are like Singapore has HSA, US has FDA, Korea has Korean MFDS. Every country has a different regulatory system, so we operate in, the babies are the same, the challenge are the same, but you have to cater to different regulatory thing. Even beyond, I will say, money and the regulatory, it's the challenge is in terms of the data. In terms of creating good data means you need leaders who understand and who can teach you. So as an engineer or as a product, you need smart customers, and smart customers mean who can look at the data, validate the data, and link like this is the cause, this is the gap. And that, I will say, are very few. There are few leaders who can smell the data and can tell you like what your systems are missing. And that's has been experience. We have found leaders across countries, but they're very few.
Okay, makes sense. And if I ask you that, so it's your third startup, Harpreet, and you have solved sort of medical problems since your startup number one. But what specific problems are you solving with with your this current startup, which is Child Imprints? What are you doing with this? Are there any other products or just services? Whatever you want to talk about.
So yeah, I mean, NICU is a complex area. These babies are, they can start as 400 gram to maybe around 2 kilos, maybe 1.5 pound and higher, just on both metrics scale. So you have a body which doesn't have a brain, so it doesn't have a immunity, doesn't have a, it's like a black box which hasn't even started thinking how to face a problem. So there's no immunity. So you're trying to give what the baby is getting in the womb, and then you're trying to measure. So the clinical play is the nurse and doctors are providing that care. You can't do anything, you just want to give that care. And what our system is trying to learn is that how that care is normal versus abnormal. And most of the diseases which happen in this world, like sepsis, neck, having disease model to predict chronic lung disease like BPD. That's what my company is doing. I will say there are not many players. I mean, there are big proprietary players like Philips, GE, who have the device monitoring, and then they have gone into device command center, like monitoring of the entire data. Then there are EMR companies, huge EMR companies like Epic, Cerner, who do all the electronic medical record, but they're more primarily in the US market. So the data is scattered between devices and the EMRs. And now new startups are coming which are combining that, oh, you need the medical record, you need to understand the doctor's view, but you need the medical device view, and then you need the regulatory, the guidelines. And then if you combine all that, the clinical decision support systems will come. So I will say Philips, GE, Epic, Cerner, there are these players which are playing this game. And then now new startups are coming and focusing on neuro ICU, cardiac ICU. We are focusing on neonatal ICU, and they're specific to that data and that domain problem.
Yeah, so it means that we have got both big players, big as in Philips, of course, is a bigger player than you, but we have got startups like you guys as well, and others.
Yeah, I mean,
So
there was Capsule Tech, which was a smaller company, than Philips acquired it. So most of these companies got acquired. So I don't know, this world
yeah,
is very aggregated.
yeah, makes sense, makes sense. This is correct. I've seen so many startups being a part of becoming part of Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and things like that.
Right.
So now, can we talk about a little technical stuff on this? That since you're the think tank behind the technical stuff as well of this, and fortunately your wife as well. So you both are into this in a technical offerings as well. So what what is the technical architecture looking like in terms of your services, and what stack are you using? Which cloud provider are you using? How is it all connected?
So on the cloud provider, I will start like we are using Microsoft.
Um,
So
I think you were on mute, or something like.
can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
I'm not on mute.
Uh,
I can hear
Probably
you.
my headset, but go on. Yeah, you go on with your, and I've
Yeah,
switched on my speaker, so yeah,
sure.
I can hear
So
you now.
I mean, I said like, let's start with cloud provider because that's
Yeah,
Microsoft.
yeah, all right.
So we are like, the product offering is the hardware device, which is
Hmm.
using single board computers. So we use BeagleBone. So we tried with Raspberry Pi, but BeagleBone was much more industrial grade. So we use BeagleBone at
Oh.
the platform level as an edge backbone. Then we have Python stack to capture the data from various devices and send it to the cloud layer, which is
Mhm.
where the we have like Spring, Hibernate, and Cassandra as a technology stack, getting this data, and then we have TensorFlow to manage this all the compute. So I will say, not many much PHI data, the patient-centric healthcare data doesn't work on cloud. So most of the hospitals have their own data centers. So we are not
Mhm.
allowed to take the data from hospital environment to the cloud. So these are private clouds, mostly Azure, which customer have in their private center,
Yeah,
and we run our fabric in their virtual
on the
machines,
edge.
yeah, on the edge, and
Yeah.
do all the machine learning stuff.
Okay, okay. So you are so the Python and TensorFlow duo is working fine with you guys. And one more question around when you talked about the Raspberry Pi. So why don't you think that it is not of that? Is it not industry grade of your particular domain, or you don't find it
So,
industry grade as?
we had actually, when you work in the NICU environment, taking devices into NICU and getting out, because you have to do a lot of fumigation. These
Hmm.
areas are zero sensitivity in terms of infection, so they're
Okay.
very very secure, humidity level
Hmm.
and everything. So BeagleBone in our experience, so we tried the Raspberry Pi, Nano Pis, BeagleBones, and a lot of single board computers in the initial stages, like 5 6 years back, when we were
Hmm.
maturing, building the technology. And we realized BeagleBone as an industry grade doesn't require anything at the bedside. You can manage remotely. The Wi-Fi, everything is very stable. So just
Hmm.
by and then we got the FDA clearance. So we didn't want to change any structure when things are working as they are working. So that's the reasoning.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And what was the, like, in your whole process from, how does it work? So if I'm a hospital, and I've opened a new hospital, and I will say, okay, Harpreet, can you please come in and put on your machines to monitor all these um, patterns, and help us with the chart imprints, or the neonatal problem. So what do you do in the start, and how does your process work
So
from
it
this?
varies between developing and developed countries. So in developing
Okay.
countries, you take your box, put it in the NICU. So I've gone in hospitals where we were allowed to start the implementation at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. because that was the downtime, and we finished
Okay.
the implementation at 7 a.m. So we put the devices, linked with all the equipment, we put the server, all the data started coming, linked with the Wi-Fi router. They only needed to give us one internet supply, and everything was up and running in 5 hours. But in developed countries, it's more regulated. So you first do your cybersecurity review, your MDS2 security review. Once you have the review, if it's like first time in that country, you do the IRB approval, ethical clearance approval. Then you link with their EMR like Epic Cerner. And once all that integration is done, then you put the devices. So over here, it's like more 1 month process. Over there, it's like 1 day process.
So this means that developing countries are moving faster than what we see in Australia or in the US.
It's
But
about the data
yeah,
integration, Arafat. So it's like, if the data, it's in India, the data is less integrated because you're only linking
yeah,
devices and the EMR is not there. So they start using the system. So your system is like mini EMR. In the Western world or the developed countries like Australia, US, you have EMR. So you link all the data, which is, so you don't want to duplicate the effort of entering the data. So you fetch that data. I think the achievement is the same. The developed countries, the data quality is much better.
yeah, it makes sense. So it, of course, and the privacy and other concerns as well.
Right.
So our health record over here is really secured, and we are quite confident and sure about it. So I think that's one of the reasons as well they have taken time to come to that stage.
Right.
Last question from me then, and this requires your experience and your philosophical thoughts on what do you think, when can we achieve a mark that we would be able to see we are nearly there, like in a case of polio, or we have nearly there, or we have tackled COVID somehow by vaccines. So what do you think in terms of neonatal, are we there yet? Is it a long journey, or or it will take some years?
So, I mean, the philosophical view is, the far you go in journey, you'll understand the journey is even longer. So you keep your experience grow. I mean, when I was engineer starting like 20s, the problem looks simpler. And then you start like your one fix can cause a build issue. And then it has a ripple effect. So you have to, your experience then tell you, do it slower, understand the effect. So I will say, when I started the company 4 years ago, people said, if you have one hospital who can give you data, so first NICU is the key. We did that. Then they said, maybe, one NICU gives you only one aspect. Do 10 NICUs. Then they said, once you have the FDA clearance, once we get the FDA clearance, they said, if you have US, Canada presence,
Yeah.
those are specialized markets. I will say, technically, if you have like good 200,000 patients, big data, where, I mean, we are 75, 80,000, where you can say like my product works in US, my product works in Australia, my product works in Canada, across the population, the models are working fine, irrespective of the demographics. The birth weight is very different in India versus US. The babies are born much higher weight in the US population. So the models and everything should work in that NICU environment, and they should start learning from themselves. I think we will learn more. So as we are growing as a company, we are solving issues, but then we are realizing we are not looking at pervasive data like room light, baby sleep, effects like around how many people are present around baby. These areas we don't think in developing countries. They are like the air pollution level around the baby. In countries like India, Pakistan, with COVID and with prior to COVID, all the air pollution we have. So I will say the knowledge improves. We should be there by I don't think it's a long journey. I don't think this is this problem has all the tools which are available. Once we have the number of hospitals and the domain knowledge behind us, we should be done with it. And 5 years from now, I think this will be a solved problem.
Wow, this is really cool. This is optimistic as well, I think. But in my opinion, people like you, if they come into this space, I think there will be a sooner resolution than 5 years, in my opinion, because by just having a discussion with you from the technical standpoint to the medical challenges as well, I think this is really cool that people like you or startups like yours, excuse me, are are stepping up into the health and giving health a new look with the help of AI.
Right.
So this is cool. Thanks, Harpreet, for your time. First of all, we are right in time. We just did not want to cross um, 30 minutes of our mark, for our listeners as well. And thank you so much for your time that you have given us today. And so I'll just wrap it off over here. Next episode will be some another cool topic. So please uh, keep listening us and provide your feedback. Reach out to us on YouTube, on Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcast, wherever you are listening us from to. And we will be back with our next episode very shortly, like in a matter of 4 weeks or 3 weeks. So thanks a lot. Thanks again, Harpreet, for your time.
Thank you so much, Arafat. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.